There is a canyon in the American West that native tribes avoided for generations because of what they believed lived inside it. White prospectors arrived anyway, in search of gold. They found it, and they named their new town after the very thing the Shoshone had been warning people about for 1,000 years. Fewer than 20 people live in that town today. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why its name was never just a name. Let's take a closer look. This is Jarbidge, Nevada, tucked into a narrow canyon in the far northeastern corner of the state, closer to Idaho than to any city most people could name. On a map, it barely registers a single thread of unpaved road ending at a cluster of buildings pressed against canyon walls 2,000 feet high. But stay with me until the end, because the story of why this town is named what it's named is stranger than almost anything else on this channel, and almost nobody outside Nevada knows it. In the summer of 1909, a prospector named Dave Bourne pushed into this canyon looking for gold and found it in the gravel bars along the river running through it. Word spread the way it always did in the American West: fast, exaggerated, and impossible to stop. By the following spring, more than 1,500 men had poured into a canyon that months earlier had held almost nobody at all. What they built here, in a matter of months, was a real town, not a camp. Multi-story buildings went up along a single narrow street wedged between the canyon walls. A jail was built in 1911, solid enough that it still stands today. Saloons opened. A school opened. By 1911, the population had climbed past 2,000 people, and by the early 1920s, the Jarbidge mining district had overtaken the legendary boomtown of Goldfield to become the single largest gold producer in the entire state of Nevada. It would not last. A fire tore through the business district in 1919, leveling much of what the boom had built. The gold itself began running out through the 1920s and 1930s, and by 1941, large-scale mining here had essentially stopped. Millions of dollars in gold had come out of this canyon, and almost as quickly as it had filled with people, Jarbidge began emptying back out. What makes this town different from the hundreds of other Nevada boom towns that quietly vanished after their gold ran out is simple. This one didn't vanish. A small number of families never left. And to understand why, you first have to understand exactly what kind of place they chose to stay in, because the canyon itself had a reputation long before a single ounce of gold was ever found here, one this video will come back to before it's over. Here is the fact that separates Jarbidge from almost every other small town in America. There is no easy way in. The road connecting Jarbidge to the outside world is unpaved for most of its length, climbing out of the high desert of northeastern Nevada before dropping through a stretch locals call the Black Grade, a descent of roughly 1,000 feet on a narrow, exposed grade that demands a driver's full attention even in good weather. In winter, that road frequently disappears entirely. This canyon can collect more than 15 feet of snow in a hard season, burying the only route in and out under drifts that no plow schedule can keep pace with. For weeks or months at a time, Jarbidge becomes functionally cut off, not evacuated, not abandoned, simply sealed shut by the same terrain that made it nearly impossible to reach in 1909 and still makes it nearly impossible to reach today. This is what officially makes Jarbidge the most isolated town in the contiguous United States. Not a designation given lightly, but one confirmed by federal distance to services metrics that measure exactly this kind of remoteness. There is no hospital here, no fire department in the conventional sense. If something goes wrong in Jarbidge in the dead of winter, help is not 15 minutes away. It may not be reachable at all until the snow decides to let it be. And yet, this is precisely the environment that convinced Nevada's last gold rush to happen here in the first place, in a canyon that terrain like this should have made almost impossible to settle at all. And it's exactly the terrain that gave the canyon its original name, long before a single prospector ever set foot in it. We'll get to that. But first, let's talk about what it actually costs to live somewhere this hard to reach. Isolation like this comes with a price tag, and in Jarbidge, that price tag shows up in almost everything. Every gallon of gasoline, every grocery item, every building material has to be trucked in over the same unpaved road that closes for months each winter, and the transportation cost gets passed directly onto anyone who wants to buy, build, or simply eat here. Real estate tells part of the story. Small homes in Jarbidge have listed in the range of roughly $380,000, a striking figure for a town with no hospital, no paved streets, and a population you could fit inside a single school bus. Undeveloped land parcels start closer to $21,000, and even then, listings are sparse, with typically fewer than 5 properties available at any given time. Owning property here isn't simply a housing decision. It's a commitment to a level of self-sufficiency that most Americans have never had to consider. There is no supermarket. The Jarbidge Trading Post covers the basics, and anything beyond that means a supply run through Rogerson, Idaho, or further into Nevada. A trip that, depending on the season, can mean hours of driving each way, weather permitting. For a resident here, the cost of living isn't measured only in dollars. It's measured in time, planning, and how much risk you're willing to accept every time you need something the town itself doesn't have. It raises the obvious question. With no hospital, no easy supply chain, and a housing market this expensive relative to what you actually get, how does anyone make a living here at all? The answer turns out to be almost as unusual as the town itself, and it's exactly where we're headed next. Jarbidge's year-round population has been counted at different times, anywhere between roughly 15 and 33 people, a number small enough that it fluctuates meaningfully depending on the season, who's wintering elsewhere, and who's just arrived. What's consistent, according to residents interviewed over the years, is the particular rhythm of daily life this size of community demands. A typical day here doesn't resemble a typical day almost anywhere else in the country. There is no daily mail delivery in the conventional sense. The post office operates on a limited schedule, tied to the same supply runs that bring in groceries and fuel. Neighbors check in on each other, not as a courtesy, but as functional necessity in a place where the nearest formal emergency response might be an hour away on a good day and entirely unreachable on a bad one. Residents describe an unusual intimacy that comes from a population this small. Everyone in Jarbidge knows not just each other's names, but each other's routines, vehicles, and habits well enough to notice immediately when something is wrong. It functions less like a town in the conventional sense and more like a single extended household spread across a handful of buildings pressed into a canyon. It's a way of life that demands real trade-offs, genuine isolation, real risk, real distance from modern conveniences most people never think twice about. And yet, generation after generation, a small number of people have looked at exactly that trade-off and decided it was worth making. To understand why, it helps to know what actually keeps this canyon economically alive today, beyond the gold that first brought people here, which is exactly what's next. With large-scale gold mining long since over, Jarbidge's modern economy runs on a small handful of businesses doing a lot of work to keep the town functional. The Jarbidge Trading Post serves as general store and unofficial community hub. 2 bars operate in a town of barely 20 people, a ratio that would be unthinkable almost anywhere else, but makes sense here, where a bar is as much a gathering hall and information exchange as it is a place to drink. The outdoor inn anchors much of what passes for the town's formal economy. A restaurant serving home-cooked meals, an attached bar and laundromat, and roughly 10 guest rooms, plus a few furnished apartments available by the day or week. For a town this small, an operation like this isn't simply a business. It's essential infrastructure, one of the only reliable sources of hot food and a place to sleep for anyone passing through. The rest of the local economy leans heavily on the Jarbidge Wilderness area, whose entrance sits right at the edge of town. Hikers, hunters, and visitors, drawn to one of Nevada's most rugged and least visited wilderness areas, provide seasonal income to the handful of residents willing to guide, host, or simply keep the town's few services running through the warmer months. It is a fragile economy, dependent on a narrow tourist season and a supply chain that can close overnight. But it's enough, apparently, to keep a dozen or more households choosing to stay. None of that, though, is really the reason people stay. The economics of Jarbidge only work because something else keeps people here first. And that same something else takes us back to the canyon's original name, the one this entire video has been building toward. If you wanted to visit Jarbidge yourself, there are exactly 2 ways in, and neither is simple. From the Nevada side, travelers typically start north of Elko, following a route through open high desert ranch land that climbs steadily into the Jarbidge Mountains before reaching the infamous Black Grade, the steep, narrow descent that drops roughly 1,000 feet into the canyon floor in a stretch that demands full concentration, even for experienced mountain drivers. From the Idaho side, the approach is different, but no less dramatic. The road plunges from open, flat, high plains directly down into the surprisingly lush East Fork Jarbidge River Canyon, a landscape shift so abrupt that first-time visitors often describe it as driving into an entirely different climate within a matter of minutes. Both routes are unpaved for significant stretches. Both are seasonal in the most literal sense, closed for months at a time once snow accumulates, reopening only when conditions allow, on a schedule dictated entirely by weather rather than any fixed calendar. There is no direct route by any major highway. There is no realistic way to reach Jarbidge without deliberately choosing to make the drive. That difficulty is not incidental to the town's story. It is, in almost every sense, the entire story. The same terrain that make Jarbidge nearly impossible to reach today is the terrain that gave this canyon its name centuries before anyone tried to build a road through it at all. A few details about Jarbidge tend to surprise people more than almost anything else about the town. The 1911 jail, still standing in the middle of town, remains open to the public. A single cell, complete with a cot, a chamber pot, and a chair. Exactly the kind of accommodations its most famous occupant would have known. That occupant was Ben Cool, the man convicted of murdering a stagecoach driver during Jarbidge's most infamous event, the last stagecoach robbery in the history of the American West, which took place just outside town on a snowy December night in 1916. Cool and his accomplices made off with roughly $4,000 in gold coins and mail. Some of that money was never recovered, and treasure hunters still occasionally search the surrounding canyon for coins locals believe remain buried somewhere nearby. The case against Cool became a genuine milestone in American criminal justice, one of the first convictions in United States history secured using bloody palm print evidence lifted directly from the stolen mail sack, years before fingerprint analysis became standard forensic practice. Cool served nearly 28 years in the Nevada State Prison. According to local accounts, he spent much of that time tending chickens. And there's one more detail almost nobody expects. Despite the harsh conditions, harsh economics, and harsh history, Jarbidge residents have, at various points, kept a genuine sense of humor about their own isolation, including, according to travel accounts, hosting one of the more unusual annual events in rural Nevada, a competitive outhouse race through the middle of town. It's the kind of detail that tells you almost everything about how a community this small survives, not despite its hardship, but by finding ways to laugh directly at it. Winter in Jarbidge is not simply cold. It is, by any reasonable measure, one of the more genuinely dangerous seasonal environments any inhabited town in the lower 48 states experiences. Snowfall in the canyon regularly exceeds 15 feet in a hard season, and because the town sits at the bottom of a narrow canyon rather than open ground, that snow doesn't simply accumulate. It drifts, piles, and seals the only road shut for weeks or months at a stretch. There is no formal fire department stationed in town. There is no hospital, no urgent care, nothing resembling the emergency infrastructure most Americans assume will always be within reach. For residents, this isn't an abstract inconvenience. It's a fact that shapes daily decision-making all winter long, from how much firewood to stockpile to how seriously to take even a minor injury when professional help could be hours or days away, weather permitting. What fills that gap, according to residents, is each other. Neighbors check on neighbors as a matter of routine, not courtesy. A community this small effectively becomes its own emergency response system, built on familiarity rather than formal training. People who know exactly which household might need help based on nothing more than an unfamiliar quiet at the wrong time of day. It's a level of self-reliance that would be genuinely difficult to sustain almost anywhere else in modern America. And it raises the question this whole video has been circling since the very first line. With all of this against them, why do people still choose it? The answer takes us back, finally, to the canyon's name. Ask residents of Jarbidge why they stay, and the answers rarely center on convenience because there is none to point to. What comes up instead, again and again, in the accounts of people who have chosen this canyon over easier places is something closer to belonging, the particular, hard-won kind that only exists in a place small enough that everyone genuinely depends on everyone else. There's a stubbornness woven through the town's entire history that outlasted the gold that built it. When the mines closed and thousands left, a handful of families looked at the same empty canyon and decided the story wasn't over. That same stubbornness, passed down in a town too small to have generations in any formal sense, seems to be what still holds a dozen or more households here today. Not naivety about how hard the winters are, but a clear-eyed decision that the difficulty is worth it for what the isolation protects. A version of independence and of community that has mostly disappeared everywhere else in the country. The Jarbidge Wilderness area, spreading out from the edge of town into some of the least visited backcountry in Nevada, isn't incidental to that decision either. For many residents, proximity to genuine, undeveloped wilderness is not a hardship to be endured alongside the isolation. It's very much the point of living here at all. But there is one more layer to why this particular canyon has held on to people for over a century. One that has nothing to do with gold or wilderness or stubborn frontier independence. It has to do with what this place was called long before any of that history began. And it's time, finally, to tell you the whole story. Long before Dave Bourne ever found gold in this canyon, the Shoshone people who had lived across this region for 1,000 years avoided it. According to their oral tradition, a giant named Saharbits, pronounced roughly Ter-Sor-Horbits, lived somewhere within its walls. He was described as a cannibal, a creature who hunted men traveling alone through the canyon, caught them, carried them back to his camp in a large woven basket, and ate them. It was not treated as a simple campfire story. Shoshone travelers genuinely avoided this canyon because of it, treating the legend as a real and specific danger tied to a real and specific place. When white prospectors arrived in 1909, chasing rumors of gold, they heard the name of the creature from Shoshone guides and locals and, mispronouncing the word as outsiders often did, began calling both the canyon and their new mining camp Jarbidge. Here is what makes that origin impossible to treat as pure coincidence. This is the same canyon that 7 years later hosted the last stagecoach robbery and murder in the history of the American West, a crime committed in a snowstorm in almost total isolation, exactly the kind of setting the old legend had warned travelers about for generations. This is the same canyon, whose isolation still, over a century later, occasionally traps residents under 15 feet of snow with no help reachable for days. The name settlers gave this place as a joke, or a curiosity, or simple mispronunciation, has turned out to describe something genuinely true about it for more than 100 years since. This is a canyon that punishes anyone who underestimates it. Whether or not you believe a cannibal giant ever walked this ground, the town that carries his name has spent over a century proving that the isolation he supposedly represented was never just folklore. It was, and still is, simply an accurate description of the place. One that fewer than 20 people right now have decided is still worth calling home. There is something fitting about a town that has survived this long, carrying a name meant, originally, as a warning. Jarbidge was never supposed to last. Not as a gold camp that outlived its gold, and certainly not as a year-round home in a canyon capable of sealing itself shut under 15 feet of snow for months at a time. And yet it has. Through a stagecoach murder that changed American forensic science, through a fire that leveled its downtown, through 100 years of mines closing and roads disappearing under snow, a small number of people have kept choosing this exact canyon under this exact name again and again. Maybe that's the real story here. Not a monster in a canyon, but the particular kind of person who hears a place was named after something meant to keep people away and decides to build a home there anyway. If you find meaning in these forgotten coordinates, consider subscribing to the map. Together, we'll keep rescuing these places from the silence of history.